Darling, we've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind, where is the power? We've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind.
Hey everybody, welcome to Ideas Don't Bleed, a comics podcast presented by Ashcan Press and featuring Matthew Rosenberg and the Supple Boiz, Ethan S. Parker and Griffin Sheridan. Hello Matthew, hello Griffin Sheridan. Is this better than Griffin's intro last week?
Griffin clearly doesn't think it is. He was already shaking his head now.
I think it's too intense.
I was a little bit tense. I was clenching.
Yeah. We definitely have built this up to be way more stressful than it needs to be.
I could do it again calmer.
No, I think it was good. I think
Let's just keep going.
Okay.
This is going to be a very chill show. My very good friend and amazing comic writer Christopher Sebela is our guest today.
Woo!
Hello.
Chris has a lot of chill energy that he brings to a room, and I think that that was as much intensity as we need for the show.
All right, I'm trying to relax.
I can get a little more intense.
Relax.
Yeah.
You're going to get more intense?
I can, if required.
No, we don't need it. We don't ask that of anybody.
We'll see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, it could get heated.
Yeah, I mean, if we start screaming at each other, that'd be great. We've never done that on this show. It's always been friendly. If you want to be our first walk-off, just like slam the headphones down, I'm game for it.
I feel like it would be weird to get in my first argument with you, like in public.
Yeah. We don't really argue about anything. But maybe that's why. It's because we're usually talking and it's in private. Maybe we should go, when we go public, it's all ugly and nasty.
Yeah, big
blow. We do always have really intense gotcha questions ready just in case the show gets boring. So
sure. Yeah.
If we whip one of those out.
Yeah. We've done some real digging into the dirt.
Like what, Ethan? What's one of our prepared gotcha questions that we have ready right now?
Chris, is it true?
That's it. That's all question. Is it true?
Is it true?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Well, Chris, thank you for joining us today on this very calm Friday that we're taping on, and whatever day people are listening to it on. I'm going to say Tuesday. I'm going to say it's Tuesday for everyone at home. And I'm excited to have you on because in addition to being a very good buddy of mine, you are one of my favorite writers in comics, and I wanted to sort of pick your brain in a way that we don't normally do, because it would be really weird if I was just sitting on your couch talking about technical stuff with you. So let's just start with the boring bullshit questions that we start with, which is why do you make comics? What is it about comics that you like?
I don't know. I've just always loved, I fell in love with comics in like 6th grade, maybe 5th. And
what was it then? What were you reading? What did you fall in love with? Do you know? Was it a specific thing?
I mean, the first thing I really remember loving was the New Universe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Just because it was like, oh, cool. I don't have to because there wasn't Wikipedia. There was no way to you had to go find the issues to figure out what happened, in the past 300 issues of X-Men.
Yeah.
Well, it sort of ties in with X-Men though, but New Universe was the first thing that I felt like, okay, I'm getting in on the ground floor. I don't have to know shit. And then from there, it just kind of grew. And then there was a night where my mom and her friends were having a party at somebody's house. And I came with because she couldn't afford a babysitter. So I stayed in the kitchen, and then her friend, I don't know, I can't remember his name. She told me once, but this dude sat across from me at the kitchen table and found out I was into comics. And I was like, yeah, I think the X-Men are cool. And then he literally walked me through the history of the X-Men. And he was
how old are you at this point? Sorry.
I mean, I'm probably 12.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah, and he's like, and then the Brood show up, and the Brood are these aliens. And I was like, this sounds so cool. So yeah, I don't know. It just kind of hit me at the right time, and then I just got super deep into them, and then I quit reading comics several times now. But I keep coming back. There's just like it's sort of inescapable. So I don't know. It just feels like I'm drawn to them, and for a long time I tried writing. I mean, I'm still trying, but writing novels and stuff. And the problem with those is like it's like, what do you do with that? Like the process there is just so insane. and I could never finish anything because nobody was waiting on anything. And comics were like, comics are kind of perfect for me because they're like, okay, we need this on this date. And then it comes out, like 3 months later. And, you're not like, hey, my book is coming out in 2026. Like, I just couldn't do that. So, I mean, comics fulfills a lot of weird needs for me.
It's funny because you talk about the sort of deadline nature of it, and I'm working on a comic with my brother now, and I had to explain to him, I was like, basically, we're going to start a train driving, and then we have to get in front of it and build rails. And it's such a foreign process to him. And like, I could just sort of see him, and he's super up for it and super game for it. But there's a little bit of terror in his eyes of being like, because he's a filmmaker. And so he comes in and is like, no, it's supposed to be written and done. And you're supposed to know what everything is. And I'm like, no, that's not how we do it really. Like, and I find comfort in that. I find, like you said, like there's comfort in the like, yeah, there's a disaster behind you if you're not moving, is really rewarding in a way that like for me, I tried to write prose and was just like, this is not for me at all.
Yeah, because nobody's waiting, nobody gives a shit. Like but at least in comics, there's a team and you have to and plus, you get your feedback a lot sooner, which, I'm definitely very insecure about a lot of stuff. And I don't know, getting like positive feedback on something I'm doing is like nice. Like, and knowing that like people are reading it, even as I'm working on it. I don't know. It's a weird liminal space of like the Schrodinger's comic. Like it's both, it exists in the world, but I am still working on it.
No, I love the like turnaround time. I know a lot of people, as I'm sure you do, who are going into other mediums or dipping into other mediums, and there's so much just like I made a thing and then it goes in a bunch of people's desks and a bunch of people's drawers for a bunch of years, or like I made a thing and maybe you're going to see it in 6 years. And that to me is like like I've been so trained by comics to be like, I'm going to see it in a few weeks and you're going to see it in a few months is so important that like I don't know that I could satisfactorily untrain myself from that. I don't know that I could separate myself from that need.
For sure.
Can I ask, because Ethan and I have had the great pleasure and the great torture of having so much time to spend on our first book, to the point where we have drafts of just about everything ready to go if need be, so it's mostly done. What is the most you've ever had done on a project before that first issue came out, and how often does that happen for you, that you have a significant amount done that you're like, okay, we don't have to panic completely? Does it ever happen?
I mean, I've done books where the whole series was done before the first issue came out.
Sweet.
So I don't know. Like, do
you like that more because you can kind of go
it's
go
not
at a different
as
pace, or do you like you being able to swivel as it comes out and react to the readers? Or
I don't really react to readers as much as I react to like what my co-creators have done with the script I gave them. And I might, more often than not, I have an ending locked in. I know where it's going, but like sometimes you get something and you're just like, oh, this is like so much better than what I was thinking, so now I'm just gonna rip this apart and stick it back together with this new piece. I like that a lot, like, because I certainly, it's not like I'm like shitting gold, like, there's a lot of bad byproduct in there. So like, it's trying to like, I need other people sometimes really to help bring out the stuff that even I don't know that I want in a book. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's a weird alchemy of like, yeah, I push people away, but also I need them with me creatively. Yeah.
You're building a small team. You like a small inner circle to make things with, but not the
Yeah.
larger world.
Can I ask a quick tangential question? I just want to rewind. We got sort of swept forward, but I didn't want to miss asking. I've never heard someone say that they got into comics through the new universe in my entire life, and I haven't touched it much. I want to ask: is there any of it that you feel like is worth revisiting as someone who it kind of mattered to at the time?
I mean, I think it all. I think it's all worth reading. It's a
Really?
very
Wow.
interesting experiment. Kickers Inc. is, of course, like just like the weirdest comic that Marvel has probably ever put out. Like it just it never makes sense from the moment you start, and it continues to not make sense. But it's just like a comic trying to justify its own existence every issue.
Right.
And then like all the other, like DP7 was my favorite because it's one of my favorite tropes, which is, get a bunch of like people who have weird abilities together, and then they form a team, and then they break out and go into the world. So DP7 is definitely, but you have to like know it all because it all comes together, and then there's the draft and the war. So it's a whole odyssey, but it was the first time that really like, I don't know, comics really spoke to me directly because like, yeah, it felt like being in on the ground floor and like, oh, cool. Like I could see how and it was like really it was a whole shared universe. And like before I ever knew what that was.
Right.
So it introduced me to a lot of comics concepts that would become important later.
I guess I'm going back.
I was actually in a comic shop last week, and they had a new universe poster hanging up, and like I was like, that's the hardest poster I've ever seen. It's like I don't remember what the tagline is. The tagline was something like, on Tuesday we blew up Pittsburgh. What are we gonna do today? Or like something like that. And I was just like, that's the poster for this book? Like, man, I need to pull those back off out of my long boxes and reread them because it was so badass. But I think the new universe thing is actually interesting to me, and I sort of wonder, for a lot of comics creators, there's like a real like the big two, the Marvel and DC, are a real goal for them. And you've obviously done stuff at both. You've done, you wrote Captain Marvel, you wrote Injustice, you wrote Blue Beetle. Like you've written a bunch of stuff at both companies, but you're, mostly built your career on the back of creator-owned books and your own stuff, which is really, I mean, it's not rare, but for a person of like the amount of creator-owned you've done and like where you are in the comics industry and your place in it, like it's really kind of exceptional to watch what you've done. And I wonder sort of if falling in love with the new universe is sort of part of that, because like for a lot of us, we were like, oh, it's part of being part of this bigger thing that we're getting into from, like you said, it's confusing. Like I got into comics through X-Men, and I was in over my head. And so I was always sort of in love with kind of being in over my head. But you have this love of creator-owned that's so strong and so apparent in your work. I wonder if the new universe thing ties into it. Have you ever thought about that, or is it?
I have not, but it makes a lot of sense. And I definitely got more into regular superhero comics, but I was always more into arcs or like, I mean, the only two things I really remember getting super crazy about in big two comics was Grant Morrison's run on Animal Man and Grant Morrison's run on Doom Patrol. And because they weren't collected in trade at the time, I literally I bought issues in at least 4 or 5 different states over like 3 years to put my collection together.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I think coming in on a brand new universe that's like, you don't have to, you get in and you get out. I mean, that book does sort of have an ending.
Sure.
And I think the other big one was Strike Force Mortuarii, which was another book I was really big into, which is a book that has
a love of that before.
Yeah, it's got a beginning and an ending, and like when people die, they stay dead. Yeah, I think just the big two, it's just so endless and unfurling, and like and nothing sticks, you know, like there's no permanence to any of it. And I think, I think like having a little pocket of your own that like has a finite life to it is much more interesting to me.
Yeah, I think a lot like when I was trying to get
Here it is. I was looking for it too.
Oh.
Couldn't find it.
That's pretty dope.
Today we
That's pretty dope.
Tomorrow? Question mark. Yeah, it's
Who
pretty bad
knows?
poster.
I was muted, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah, so maybe we'll just all buy the poster after this podcast.
I'm in.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. For me, like a big thing for me when I wanted to start making comics, not when I was getting into comics. I was a little kid when I got into comics, but when I wanted to make comics, you know, I said to my dad, who was a writer, you know, like I want to do this. And his only experience with comics was like superhero stuff from when he was younger. And he was so against it. And he said, I think I've said on the podcast before, maybe when like, he said a story is the curtain comes up, you meet a character, and when the curtain comes down, that character is changed. And he was like, how is Peter Parker a different person in your lifetime than he was in mine? He's like, these aren't stories. And I think like, to me, I was like, well, of course they're stories. And like, there's just endless stories. And that's sort of fascinating. And to him, it was so foreign. And to hear you be like, yeah, I really love, you know, like the new universe stuff. And there's sort of an end to it, or Strike Force or whatever. Like, it feels to me like that is the key to something about why your career to me is so fascinating and unique and sort of aspirational and cool. But maybe not. Maybe I'm just psychoanalyzing.
No, I think it's a very, very good it's something I've never thought about before. But honestly, that's as good an explanation as anything I can come up with. And I'm me.
Yeah, you think about you a lot. I only think about you, you know, once or twice a day. So this is
that's sweet.
Well, you know, it could be more. I'm not gonna lie. It should be more. One of the things I wanted to talk about though is, and I'm gonna say a bunch of stuff that's gonna make you uncomfortable, but that's
okay.
This is our Oprah's thing. It's not Oprah. Who makes people cry? Oprah makes people cry?
Oprah makes people cry.
She loves making people cry.
Okay, yeah. If she's into that, I'm into it too. And that's sort of the thing about your work that always strikes me the most, that sort of impresses me the most and intimidates me the most, is just your ability to do high concept stuff. That like both in building these things but also executing them. You always have these like, they're just the amount of time I've been sitting on your couch and you just are like, well, I have this idea, and then you just say like the craziest shit I've ever heard, and I'm just like, what? And you're like, yeah, and then this happens, and I'm like, man, that's so good. And like, I don't understand sort of where it comes from. Like, are you aware that you're like a very high concept writer? Like, do you feel like that's a thing for you? Do you focus on that? Or are you just like, yeah, weird, crazy stuff? I mean, I remember specifically like you explaining what Cold War, the concept of Cold War, your book Cold War, and me just being like, you were like, yeah, you know, it's all these people, rich people who had their, you know, their brains cryogenically frozen when they were sick, and they're all awoken because they're put in giant battle robots to fight in the future in a war, and they're the fuel for these robots, and they just wake up and they're like, go fight. And I fucking love that idea more than almost any idea I've ever heard. But it's also so wild. Like, this is my complex way of being like, where do your ideas come from? But also like, do you try and build out these crazy, cool, big ideas, or does that just come to you naturally, or what is it?
It's, you know, I'm just trying to come up with stuff that's cool to me. Like there was a period, I guess there still is, where I have a notebook that I just call Woodshed, and to start it off, I would just like, I'd pick an idea that interested me. So like, hey, I think teleportation is cool. What can I do? And I give myself one page front and back. And I just, you know, try and figure out if I can think of a cool idea with that. And if I can't come up with something in that page, then probably not meant to be. But, you know, like I came up with a new idea last week that like was just the dumbest. It all came from that phrase "getting a mulligan," which is a stupid golf term. That's
Sure.
like, you know, you get a
It's a
do-over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, it was because of a tweet I made actually. But as I was walking to the coffee shop from my house, I just started thinking about that phrase, and then I threw time travel into it, and then, you know, like 5 blocks later, there was another element, and by the time I got to the coffee shop, I was like, "That's a really cool idea." So like sometimes it'll be like that. Sometimes I will press it and I'll like pick a concept and see if I can make something cool with it. It's just about stuff that interests me. So like my first book, High Crimes, was because I was like an Everest nerd. Like, you know, once a year I would like deep dive on Everest and just like watch documentaries, and I'd reread Into Thin Air, and I'd read books by other people who were on that same climbing disaster. And then it eventually got to where I wanted it out of my head, and to stop doing this. So I came up with High Crimes.
Did it work?
Yeah. Now I haven't touched Everest stuff since, and it's kind of nice because it's just getting worse.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just like, you know, I most of my really good ideas come to me in like really just idle moments, like if I'm on a smoke break or like on a walk, or, you know, very rarely do I like force myself. You know, Cold War I came up with somebody at a bar, like so yeah, I definitely you know, want to do something that's kind of cool and interesting, just because that's the kind of stuff I'm into.
Yeah.
Like I like high concepts, especially if they're done well, but you know, all that stuff is just a vehicle to like, I don't know, insert some sort of characters and dynamics into it that I can, like, that's the stuff that ultimately holds me. And I just need a really cool like envelope to stick it all in.
Yeah, that was sort of going to be my next question, was that, like, you know, I and maybe mistakenly, like, I tend to think of you as a sci-fi writer because you work in high concept so much, but like you're not really totally a sci-fi writer, but you do operate in that world a lot. But I think the thing that separates you from a lot of the like high concept writers that I read is that, like, you can tell there's a human component at the core, and that's the story that you're most excited to tell. That like you have these high concepts and they're set dressing, that they're, you know, you build these crazy worlds, but you're like, but it's not about the crazy world. It's about how, you know, two people interact within that crazy world. And I always like, I'm much more of a character driven writer, I think, and much more attracted to that in stories. And so I'm always fascinated by your stuff, because like I hear the ideas and they blow my mind, but then when I read it, I'm like, oh, this feels like a book, you know, like I wish I wrote, because it's a great character study. It's a great character drama. It's a great, you know, fun adventure story, but it also has this fucking super ambitious storytelling around it. So I was curious about, you know, your relationship between like character work and the story and the high concept.
Yeah, I mean, like, character always is most important, or it's more important to me now. I remember something that really stuck it for me was when I was developing Crowded. I really only had like the basic idea, and I sent it to an editor at a publisher that I was friendly with. And I was like, hey, I think this would be really cool. Sent it to him. His reply came back. He's like, yeah, the idea is cool, but I'm not sure why anybody should care about it. I was like, fuck, he's right. Like, like, and that really like shifted how I approached it. Like when I would write pitches, like, you know, I would like just like dwell on the concept, and like over explain it. And so from that point on, I always write pitches now where it's the character centered. So like the first line is always about like blah 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 is doing blah blah blah, and then unfurl that like they're inside this world. So yeah, just because I ultimately, character stuff is the stuff I think I like the most. It's the stuff I get most excited about.
Sure.
Because that stuff is like, you don't plan that stuff, like when I sit down and like world build, like, you're putting all your pieces down. And so when you walk in, you know all that stuff. It's not like occasionally you'll invent one or two new things, but it's all pretty set in stone at that point. But character stuff, I never like go like, okay, then they're going to have like, I have broad strokes, but I don't have like, here's how this conversation is going to go. And I've known it for 3 months. I don't know it until I sit down and write it. And therefore, I think that's why it's most exciting to me, because it's the stuff. It's the little treat I leave for myself after I've done all the hard work.
Well, I'm glad you got a little treat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone deserves a little treat.
I don't necessarily believe that, but I think you do. So leave it there. I said before, that I sort of tend to think of you as a sci-fi writer because you do a lot of these high concept sci-fi books. But actually, you've done a bunch of crime stuff, and you've done a bunch of sort of almost pseudo romance crime stuff, and other stuff. Like, I guess I'm wondering, are there genres that you gravitate towards more? Is there stuff that pulls you in? Is there stuff that you don't want? Is there stuff you don't want to do where you like, I would never want to do that?
Yeah, I can't think of any genres that I wouldn't want to do. It's more about like how prepared I am to do them. Crime is definitely, I think, my first love, because I spent a lot of time, like the year. It is the year before I moved to Portland. I had this weird hang up for a long time about genre fiction, where I think I knew these like really snotty dudes in college, and I think some of that bled into me. So when I was like thinking about like writing a novel, I was like, no, I can't write like a crime book or a sci-fi. I have to write an important book. I have to be fucking John Irving or somebody.
Yeah.
And it was strangling me. So like I bought a bookshelf, and then I went and I filled it with crime books, and that's all I read all year. And I kind of like sort of broke my programming. So I think crime is now first and foremost in terms of like, oh, you can tell like really cool stories, but also like have something to say inside of that. And just because, it's a genre that like my friend once called gun fiction, doesn't make it any less than,
That sounds sick.
Yeah, that sounds better.
That's a good title.
Yeah. Definitely crime, sci-fi, horror, but horror scares me because horror is like my favorite genre, so I'm like really intimidated.
Yeah, that's what I was going to sort of ask. I was like, I can't think of you really doing a straight horror book. Like, am I missing something?
I mean, Blink is a.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I mean, it's mostly a straight horror book. I mean, it's also sort of meta.
But you're the biggest horror movie nerd I know. Like, you watch every horror movie. So I was fascinated that it's like, well, you love this genre, but then you don't really do too much in it.
I'm scared to do stuff because you spend all these years like, criticizing the genre that you love and like wading through the worst parts of it, and you're just like, God, all these people are terrible. And then it's like, all right, now it's my turn, and it's like, fuck, I'm gonna be one of those. Like, I'm I'm gonna be the fifth Saw movie. So
that's my favorite one.
Mine is the sixth, which is all about life insurance.
Actually, I've only seen the first one, but for reasons I don't understand, Tyler Boss watched all of them in a week and then called me to explain what they were all about.
Did he explain the timeline?
He sort of was like, the timeline's real confusing and sort of jumped around. The thing he was really dwelling on was that one of them is about a support group for survivors, but that they all like were happy to have been tortured, that it was like sort of the best thing for them. And he was like, that was a really fascinating take, and I don't quite know why they went. And he was really dwelling on it in a way, and I was sitting there listening to him talk to me about Saw for a long time. It was a fun conversation, but didn't make me want to watch the other Saw movies.
No, it's more fun to hear about Saw movies than to actually watch them.
Yeah. okay, I think that clears up the horror. The horror thing is something that's actually been on my mind a long time. Of
Has it
just
been
like,
bugging
why-
you?
Yeah, I have a weird relationship with horror and comics because it doesn't work the same way as it does in movies. Like, you just have too much control over your own reading experience that it never feels like there's things that are creepy and unnerving, but I've never been scared by a comic. Like,
I've never been scared by a horror movie though. Like, that's not what the genre is about to me. Like, it's about just like building that atmosphere. It's not necessarily.
Did you see Saw 8? That one's pretty scary.
No. But yeah, I think it's more about just sort of building that atmosphere of dread and like what could happen more than like, oh man, that freaked me. Like, I can't think of it. I've seen horror movies that have like lightly scarred me, and like I don't ever want to see something like that again in a good way. But yeah, I mean, horror movies aren't scary to me, but that's also like, I don't know what would be.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not super afraid of horror movies, but there's still some that sort of get my pulse racing a little bit, or get it up. And I just don't feel the same thing from comics.
Sure.
And it's not a shot at them. I like horror comics and I read horror comics all the time, but I'm always sort of thinking about it as chasing the same sort of experience that the movies do, which is naive, I guess, of me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just haven't found horror stuff that I think would justify like all that work, I guess. I just think of like horror as like a really low class genre, and it's like I don't want to like take up an artist, like I don't want to take up 6 months of their life with this. Like, they should be doing something good. They should be drawing Batman or something like.
Wow. Okay, that's an interesting take. They should be. I don't want to take up their time with this. I like it.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our discussion with Christopher Sebela. Make sure to check out GODFELL as well as everything else Chris is working on by giving him a follow on Twitter @XTOP. To get the latest episodes of this podcast, as well as news, giveaways, and even comics delivered straight to your inbox, go to ashcanpress.com and sign up for the newsletter. We'll be back next week for part 2 of our discussion, and in the meantime, you can write to us at ideasdon'tbleedpod@gmail.com, or tweet to Matthew Rosenberg @AshcanPress on Twitter, me @Tales to Astonish, or Griffin @GriffSheridan. We'll include some of your correspondence on the show, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And big thanks to Summer People for our theme song, Where's the Poison? Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Where is the boy?